Welcome to the Black and Gold Breakdown, everybody. My little show to talk Steelers on the YouTube channel. It's also streaming on the app formerly known as Twitter. Steelers making a few moves today that I think will affect what their draft strategy will ultimately be and will look like. And then the hip drop tackle, what my thoughts are overall on that becoming a new rule. So we'll dive into that in the next half hour or so. Start off with the Steelers moves. They sign quarterback Kyle Allen, who will likely be the third quarterback on the depth chart this year. Spent last year in Buffalo backing up Josh Allen. Prior to that was in Houston. And before that was in Washington and Carolina. So a guy with some experience, 26 touchdowns in his career. I think that's a fine guy to have as QB3. You know, a guy who's been in the league since I believe 2018 out of Texas A&M. That's a perfect QB3 to have on the roster. And I know that a lot of Steelers fans were hoping that they would draft a guy. I think I was one of the few who was like, I really don't want to see them spend draft capital on a guy who's probably not going to play. And we see it every year with teams that, just take flyers on quarterbacks. You're going to have, like the Saints drafted Jake Haener last year, and it meant absolutely nothing, just nothing. So more often than not, when these guys that go on, the middle of day 2 or day 3, the best hope is that they become like okay backups or journeymen. And that just feels like you can do so much more with the pick, or draft somebody that has a chance to be so much more for you rather than just a guy who sits behind 2 quarterbacks and only plays if something goes horribly wrong. So I think with the signing of Kyle Allen, that erases the Steelers drafting a quarterback at all in the draft. They're more than likely going to bring in a 4th arm into camp, but my guess is it's going to be similar to what it was last year with Tanner Morgan. It's just going to be an undrafted free agent guy that they bring in as a camp arm, and then that'll be their 4th guy. And we'll see him in the 4th quarter of preseason, or the last game of the preseason for like the 4th quarter. So that would be my guess as to how they handle having that extra camp arms. They'll just go the UDFA route like they did before with Tanner Morgan, and that'll be their quarterback room. It'll be Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, Kyle Allen, and then a UDFA in camp in the preseason. And then once the regular season does come, it'll be Wilson, Fields, and Allen as the Steelers quarterback room, and they won't be drafting a guy, which, again, I'm glad that they likely won't be. There's a lot of talk about, maybe they'll draft Spencer Rattler. If they were to do that, I don't want them to draft a quarterback, but if they took Rattler, I'd be like, all right, we'll see what's there, and I wouldn't bash it. And I'd look forward to seeing him in camp. But again, I'd prefer them not to draft a quarterback, just because, again, like, more than likely the guy's just going to sit on the bench and not become much of anything. We've seen it with the Steelers before, with the mid-round quarterbacks that they've taken. You get a lot of Landry Jones. They drafted Dennis Dixon, who started a game for them. And by the way, the game that he started was very fun to watch, and they beat Atlanta in week 1. But, I'm pretty sure that's the only game he started for them and appeared in for them. So, it's when you take mid-round quarterbacks, man, like I'm very much out on that, and I'm glad that it looks like the Steelers won't be doing that. They also signed wide receiver Quez Watkins. Again, another depth receiver signing. This to me looks like they're either they know that they have a guy that they're going to trade for, whether that be Brandon Aiyuk, Terry McLaurin, or what have you, or they're planning on drafting 2 guys. They could also sign somebody else, but that would be 3 other signings at receiver, which again, it's a new era for Steelers football, and Omar Khan does things differently. So that certainly is possible if they wanted to still go the Tyler Boyd route. But to me, it looks like either they're going to trade for a guy and then draft whoever their 3rd wide receiver will be, or they're just going to draft 2 guys. the Quez Watkins signing, I mean, to me, that just says, okay, that's more or less competition for Calvin Austin. Quez Watkins isn't going to be, your third receiver, your second receiver. Neither is Van Jefferson. Neither is Calvin Austin. And a lot of Steelers fans do this thing where they really overrate Calvin Austin and think that he's going to be like the second or third receiver in the offense. He's not. Calvin Austin is a guy who, is more or less a gadget player who's a good returner. And if you get him, 25 to 35 catches on the year, he's also your punt and kick returner. Okay, cool. But Calvin Austin isn't going to be this offense's second or third receiver. Again, I think that more or less Quez Watkins is competition for, that depth, those for spots 4, 5, and 6 on the depth chart. You're going to have Van Jefferson, Calvin Austin, Quez Watkins, Marquez Callaway, and Denzel Mims all competing for those 3 spots. And then again, I think the Steelers are going to either they think that they're going to be able to trade for somebody, or they know that that they have a trade ready to pull the trigger on, or they're just going to draft 2 guys. They got 4 picks in the top 100. I could very easily see them using 2 of them on receiver. If they wanted to go, left tackle or center in the first round, then receiver, and then left tackle or center, whichever they didn't take already, and then another receiver, would not shock me in the slightest. Been a lot of talk about Ricky Purcell, the receiver from Florida. I think that he could slide in and be the slot guy right away. And then if they wanted to take a Roman Wilson, if they wanted to take a Javon Baker, someone of that, like Malachi Corley, they had representatives at Western Kentucky's Pro Day to see Malachi Corley. So there's plenty of guys that they can take. But Calvin Austin, Van Jefferson, Quez Watkins, these aren't going to be, the third receivers on this team. That's going to be either somebody else that they sign or somebody that they draft, and they're going to trade for wide receiver 1A to be the X receiver, while George Pickens is the Y. But again, I think that Steelers fans do this thing where they overrate Calvin Austin. And that's every fan base has that guy that they do it with, where, I think what's a good comp for that? I don't want to say Jawan Jennings for the 49ers because, he kind of fits that third receiver, third down ace guy, and he's really good in the Super Bowl. But every fan base has that guy that they kind of go hard for and overrate a little bit. I think Khalif Raymond is probably the best comp for what the Steelers would get out of either Quez Watkins or Calvin Austin. Like, they're not getting some guy who's going to be, like what Tyler Boyd was for the Bengals, or what Steve Breston was for the Cardinals the year they went to the Super Bowl when they had 3 1,000-yard receivers. Calvin Austin's not going to be that. He's going to be, a return guy who catches between 25 and 35 balls in the year, and that's about it. He can be dynamic with those touches, sure, but again, not going to be, one of the predominant targets in the offense. Not to mention the fact that, Arthur Smith's offense is going to feature a lot of Pat Freiermuth. I think it's going to feature a lot of Darnell Washington, especially with this new hip drop rule. Like, what nickel corner is going to see 6'8" Darnell Washington running at him and going to be able to tackle him? None of them. I want Darnell Washington getting slot snaps at some point this year, because who the hell is going to be able to stop him at first contact? No one. If you get him the ball, that's an easy minimum 9 yards. I just can't keep going to that well. I think that's something that they should absolutely do. So hopefully that's something that's explored. And that's another reason why I'm not too worried about what they're doing at receiver, because tight ends are going to be more prevalent in this offense. So it's going to be, like I said, Freiermuth and Washington are going to be, get more looks. And obviously Pickens is going to be a big part of what they do in the pass game, but we'll see what they do. They're going to draft a receiver again, unless they have a trade ready-made that they know is about to happen. I think that they're going to draft 2. I'd be surprised at this point if they just keep signing guys. I don't know if this Tyler Boyd thing is going to come to fruition. Apparently there's like some sort of standoff between Boyd and the organization. So if they end up drafting 2 receivers, okay. If they end up drafting 1 and trading for 1, cool. Especially if that 1 ends up being Brandon Aiyuk that they trade for, great. But I'm not too worried about what they're doing. And again, the likes of Van Jefferson, Quez, Watkins, and Calvin Austin are competing for the final 3 spots in the depth chart with Marquez Callaway and Denzel Mims. I don't think either of them are going to be the 3rd receiver or the 2nd receiver on this team. I just don't see it happening. Doesn't make sense to me. They're like Van Jefferson and Quez Watkins and Calvin Austin, all of them kind of fit a similar mold. Austin's a little bit smaller than Jefferson, as is Watkins, but deep ball threats. Van Jefferson can run block a little bit. Quez Watkins and Calvin Austin, again, can be that like Khalif Raymond type. I think Nick Farwell is the one who I saw make that comp on Twitter today, which I thought was really good comp. So these are very much just like specialist role players that can be your 4th and 5th receivers on the roster, get some touches throughout the season, be reliable to come in if somebody gets hurt, but they're not going to be predominant options in the offense. I don't see that happening. They also signed defensive lineman Dean Lowry. They needed a defensive lineman, a rotational piece with experience. That's fine. I don't really feel one way or the other about it. They currently have their current line. They got Isaiah Loudermilk, DeMarvin Leal on the roster. They throw Lowry in there, and then obviously Ogunjobi, Hayward, and Benton. We'll see. I don't know if DeMarvin Leal is going to make the final 53-man roster. I just don't know if he's really a fit. I don't think the Steelers have necessarily been using him correctly either. But I could see Dean Lowry being a guy that hops over him on the depth chart. Depending on how Isaiah Loudermilk plays, he could just become one of the more predominant rotation guys ahead of Loudermilk and Leal. So I think that there's good upside with it, not really any downside to it. Worst case scenario, he doesn't work out, and you cut your losses, you move on, and it is what it is. Best case scenario is okay, yeah, you got a pretty solid rotational defensive lineman. Spent the first 7 years of his career with Green Bay. Spent last year in Minnesota on Brian Flores' defense. So I can see this being fine. And if it's not, then it's not as if it's a franchise-altering move to move on from a depth rotational defensive lineman. So that's my thoughts on everything right now. In terms of this hip drop tackle rule being put into place, I wrote about it for USA Today, and the deck was already so heavily stacked against defenders where, if you get called for PI, it's spot at the foul, first down. If you try to make a play on the ball, but we think that the receiver was defenseless, well, guess what? That's a penalty too and an automatic first down. If you sack the quarterback with your body weight, guess what? That's a first down and a penalty. And now, if you try to tackle a guy from behind and you don't defy the laws of physics, then that's a penalty and a first down, and more than likely a fine. Like the NFL is, it's one thing to be, protective of the head and neck area. That's fine and understandable. But everything else that has happened over the last few years with a lot of these rule changes, man, it's just contradictory to what football's supposed to be. It doesn't matter what you do. You will never completely eliminate injuries from football. And it feels like that's kind of what the goal is with what the NFL is doing. It's just not going to happen. Football is a violent sport. At least it used to be. And with all of these rules that keep coming out of trying to take certain types of tackles out of the game or hits out of the game, like at the end of the day, it's football, man. And again, it's one thing to try to protect the head and neck area. Totally on board with that. But what's going to be an unintended consequence of this hip drop rule is guys are going to say, well, I can't wrap him and do, the hip drop. So I'm just going to aim at knees because that's all I can do now. Can't hit him up top because that'll be a penalty. I can't wrap him from behind. That's a penalty. So guess what? I don't want to do it. but I'm diving at your knee. And that's going to lead to a lot more knee injuries, and it's going to end to a lot more there's going to be more injuries after the rule was created than the hip drop ever had injuries. And it's probably going to lead to more issues for defensive players, because I can see in 2 years they're going to be like, okay, no more hits to the knee. If you hit the knee, that's a penalty. The deck just keeps getting stacked against defensive players. And with this hip drop rule, I can absolutely see them being like, all right, well, I don't want to come at your knee, dude, but I also don't want a 15-yard penalty. So, here I come. And it's not fair, but I think that is absolutely going to be an unintended consequences. We're going to see a lot more, not just knee. I think we're going to gruesome knee injuries. So, we saw. Now, granted, this one wasn't purposeful or anything like that, but when Nick Chubb got hurt last year against the Steelers, we could. I hope that isn't what happens. But if guys aren't allowed to tackle, then they're just going to come speeding bullet at your knee. And whatever the consequences of that may be from the competition committee, they're probably not going to be good for defensive players. And defensive players are just going to be standing there being like, what do you want us to do? Because we can't hit them up top. That's a penalty. Can't hit them when they go to make a catch. That's a penalty. I can't put my body weight on them. That's a penalty. What the hell else do you want me to do? You want me to clothesline them? I'll do that. If given the opportunity, if I can't do anything else, then sure, I'll give them a clothesline from hell. But I'm sure that's going to be an unnecessary roughness penalty, so can't do that either. The deck is so heavily stacked in favor of the offense, and now it's even more in favor of the offense. And if you're a defender, you just got to be like, what are we supposed to do, man? What can we do? So I feel for defensive players around the NFL. I hope that this doesn't have as much of an impact as a lot of people are expecting it to. But the NFL is not doing defenders any favors. And, it's not fair to them. And hopefully it doesn't become too much of a factor in games where it starts deciding the outcomes of games, where, it's, I don't know, a team has the ball at the opponent's 47, they're down by 2, a guy makes a catch, tackle's made, clock runs out, but here comes a flag. Hip drop tackle, 15-yard penalty, team comes in, untimed down, game-winning field goal, game over. Hopefully that doesn't happen. Am I ruling it out to happen? Absolutely not. But hopefully nothing like that happens, and we spend the entire next week being like, see, we told you this hip drop tackle rule it's going to affect the outcome of games. So hopefully that doesn't happen. But it does certainly feel like at some point this year, there's going to be a call for the hip drop, and it's going to decide the outcome of a game. And God forbid if it's going to be like week 18 and the winner goes to the playoffs and the loser goes home and the hip drop decides who goes to the playoffs. I mean, we can hope that doesn't happen. But my goodness, man. And again, I understand player safety as it pertains to the head and neck area. But it's football at the end of the day, and you can't try to take the contact out of football. And that's what it feels like the NFL really wants right now, is this just to become not football anymore. But we'll see. We'll see. Hopefully it doesn't end up deciding outcomes of games, especially outcomes of important games, playoff games, playoff positioning. Hopefully that isn't a direct, that isn't directly affected by this rule. But it certainly feels like eventually it will be, which sucks. Certainly does suck. Those are just my overall thoughts on it. And the Steelers as a whole right now. Again, excited about what this season's gonna bring. I don't think I'm forgetting anything. Mike Tomlin spoke at the league meetings, about the all the moves that were made, pretty much just confirming what we already knew as it pertains to the Kenny Pickett trade. Although the way he worded it, it sounded as if the Steelers were in the process of trying to trade for Justin Fields while Pickett was still on the roster. So that's interesting. But regardless, didn't say anything too noteworthy or anything like that. He was asked about, why, or just to clarify more or less, the quote unquote pole position for Russ. And it's the same thing that I've been saying is like, there's nothing wrong with, just getting your ducks in a row and be like, okay, we're going to go into camp with Russ is the one, Justin is the two, but Justin's still going to get a chance to compete. Okay, cool. That's fine. My guess is Russell Wilson will be the week 1 starter. I think we'll see Justin Fields at some point this season. That's just my overall gut feeling on it. But we'll see. We'll see. Again, nothing else that Tomlin said really all that noteworthy. He spoke about Cam Hayward's groin surgery that he had last month. He said he doesn't expect it to be any sort of factor going into camp or anything like that. So don't think that anything that Cam's dealing with from 2023 will carry over. But he is going to be 35 entering this year, and you got to start to wonder, okay, how much longer is Cam going to keep playing? It's a question that, is fair to ask at this point in his career. But again, nothing that Tomlin said outside of the Cam thing, which wasn't really all that much talked about, but all of the news that's gone down in terms of the trades and everything of that sort. Nothing too noteworthy. He spoke about the Dante Jackson trade. There was rumors that the Steelers were going to try to trade for Dante Jackson at the deadline last year. And they didn't end up doing it, but they do it now. He said that there was no sort of like ill will or anything between him and Deontay Johnson. So outside of that, man, it's March 25th, and we're a month away from the draft. And that's just kind of right now, it's that period where, okay, the big wave of free agency is over. A big trade or so could take place. But as of right now, I mean, all of the, we're just waiting on the draft. And then after the draft, it basically just becomes a nearly 3-month waiting game for training camp. And, we're all just kind of waiting for it together. So that's kind of where we are right now in terms of the Steelers. And, yeah, we'll start doing these more frequently. Again, if you have been subscribed to the channel for the last year or so, this is a Steelers stream that I started doing like once a week last year during the off season. Once the season picked up, though, it became a little bit busy. So I only focused on, recording the pump fake each week. So throughout the season, though, this year, I might try to do one of these per week on top of the 2 pump fake shows. But we'll see where it takes us. We got a lot of time to worry about that still, almost 6 months to really figure out what I'm going to do content-wise in season. But appreciate everybody for tuning in. Tomorrow on the Pump Fake on the channel, I'll be joined by Amy Trask, which is going to be a lot of fun. Can't wait for that. And you can listen to that wherever you get your podcasts. So that'll be a good time with Amy Trask. Can't wait for it. Appreciate y'all for tuning in to the stream, Black and Gold Breakdown. And we'll see you later on in the week with more content. Appreciate y'all for tuning in. Have a good one.